I still hear the breathing sometimes, that wet, rattling sound from deep in the Blackwood mine. 3 years ago, my cousin Rowan, my friend Delilah, and I went down there looking for scrap metal to sell. We were broke, desperate, and stupid. What we found in those tunnels wasn't human, but it knew our names. It spoke in voices of the dead. And when something grabs your ankle in the dark with fingers that shouldn't exist, you realize some places stay sealed for a reason. This is what happened when we ignored the warnings. Stay until the end, because what's still down there might be calling your name next. Jesse hadn't slept in 2 days. Not because he couldn't, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the eviction notice taped to his door. 30 days. That's all he had left. He sat at the corner booth of Maggie's diner, nursing cold coffee he couldn't afford to refill when Rowan slid in across from him. His cousin looked worse than he felt. Dark circles, hands that wouldn't stop moving. "I've got an idea," Rowan said quietly. Jesse didn't look up. "If it involves money we don't have, I don't want to hear it. Blackwood Mine." The name made Jesse's stomach tighten. He'd grown up hearing stories about that place. His grandmother used to grab his wrist whenever he mentioned it, her fingers like iron. Some places are sealed for reasons that got nothing to do with safety, Jesse. You remember that. "It's been closed since '87, Jesse said. "There's nothing there. Copper wire, old equipment. My grandfather's map shows a supply room right near the entrance." Rowan pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, creased and fragile. "1 trip. We take what we can carry, sell it, and we're good for months." Jesse stared at the map. The lines were faded, but clear enough. His hands were shaking. He hated that Rowan noticed. The diner door opened. Delilah walked in, her pharmacy uniform wrinkled, her eyes red. She didn't say anything, just sat down next to Rowan and put her head in her hands. "Mom's medication got denied again," she whispered. "I don't know what to do." Rowan looked at Jesse, then at Delilah, then back at the map. "1 trip," he said. "In and out, before dawn, before anyone sees us. We take what we need and never go back." Jesse wanted to say no, wanted to tell them about his grandmother's warnings, about the way people in town still cross themselves when they pass the old mine road. But Delilah was crying now. Silent tears she kept wiping away like she was ashamed. "When?" Jesse heard himself ask. "Tomorrow morning, 4 a.m. Jesse folded the map carefully, his hands steadier than they should have been. He told himself it was just an abandoned mine, just old copper and rust. But that night, when he finally tried to sleep, he dreamed of his grandmother's voice. Desperate, pleading. "Some places stay sealed for a reason, Jesse." He woke up at 3:45 a.m., got dressed in the dark, and wondered why his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The fog was so thick, Jesse could barely see Rowan's back as they approached the mine entrance. It felt wrong, the kind of cold that settled in your bones before you even realized you were shivering. The entrance was partially collapsed, just like Rowan's grandfather had described. But there was a gap, wide enough to crawl through if they went one at a time. Rowan went first, then Delilah. Jesse hesitated at the opening, his flashlight beam swallowed by the darkness inside. For a moment, he thought about turning back, about walking away and never speaking of this again. But Delilah's mother needed medication, and Jesse needed to keep a roof over his head. He crawled through. The air inside tasted like rust and something else, something organic and decayed. Jesse's lungs burned with each breath. The tunnel was wider than he expected, stretching into absolute blackness. Rusted rail tracks ran along the floor, disappearing into nothing. "This place is massive," Rowan whispered, his voice too loud in the silence. Delilah moved her flashlight along the walls. She stopped. Her hand was shaking. "What is that?" she asked. Jesse followed her light. Deep gouges in the rock, fresh-looking, like something had dragged claws down the stone. "Animals?" Delilah's voice was barely audible. Rowan laughed, but it sounded hollow. "What animal lives this deep?" No one answered. They found the supply room 20 minutes later. Rotted boxes, collapsed shelving. Nothing valuable, nothing worth the risk. Jesse felt the disappointment settle over them, like a weight. They'd come here for nothing. Then his flashlight caught something in the corner. A backpack, newer looking, out of place. He opened it carefully. Water bottles, a journal, a digital camera. Rowan leaned over his shoulder. Someone else was here. Jesse flipped open the journal. The handwriting was messy, rushed. He found the last entry and read it aloud. Day 3. It mimics voices perfectly now. It called me by my childhood nickname. How does it know? I'm going deeper to find the entry ended mid-sentence. Like whoever wrote it had been interrupted. Delilah's breathing changed. Short, quick. We need to leave, right now. But Jesse was staring at the date. 6 months ago. Someone had been here 6 months ago, and they'd never made it out. Rowan grabbed the camera. Maybe there's something on here, evidence. A sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel. Faint, distant. All 3 of them froze. It sounded like breathing. Jesse's hands wouldn't stop shaking as he pocketed the journal. He didn't know why he took it. Didn't know why he couldn't let it go. But something in those words felt like a warning. He was already too late to hear. Jesse slipped the camera into his pocket. Maybe there was evidence on it. Maybe they could figure out what happened to whoever wrote that journal. Maybe they could avoid the same fate. They turned back toward the entrance, their flashlights cutting through the dark. Jesse's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Then Rowan stopped. "You hear that?" Jesse listened. At first, nothing. Just the sound of their breathing. The drip of water somewhere in the distance. Then he heard it. A voice. Faint. Feminine. Crying. "Help! Please! I'm hurt!" It was coming from deeper in the mine. From a tunnel that sloped downward into darkness they couldn't see the end of. Delilah's fingers dug into Jesse's arm. "We need to go, now." But Rowan was already moving toward the sound, his flashlight beam swinging wildly as he walked faster. "Someone's down there," Rowan's voice cracked. "We can't just leave them." Jesse grabbed for him, but Rowan pulled away. Delilah looked at Jesse, her eyes wide with terror. But they couldn't let Rowan go alone. They followed. The tunnel sloped downward. The air grew colder, thicker. The voice got clearer with every step. "Rowan? Rowan, is that you?" Rowan stopped so suddenly Jesse almost ran into him. "Thank God," the voice continued, warm, familiar, desperate. "I can't move my leg. Please, baby, I need help." Rowan's flashlight was shaking so badly, the beam looked like it was dancing across the walls. "That's..." His voice was barely a whisper. "That's my mom's voice." Jesse felt ice spread through his chest. "But my mom is dead," Rowan said, louder now, like he was trying to convince himself. "She died 5 years ago." The voice didn't stop. It kept calling. Perfectly matching the tone Jesse remembered from Rowan's mother. The same softness, the same love. "Baby, Please help me. It's so dark down here. I'm scared." Rowan took a step forward. Jesse grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back hard. "We're leaving, right now." "But what if—" "It's not her." Jesse's voice was shaking. "You know it's not her." Delilah was already backing away, her breathing coming in short gasps. The voice called again, closer now, like it was moving toward them through the dark. "Rowan, please don't leave me here alone." Jesse didn't wait. He pulled Rowan backward, forcing him to move. Delilah turned and started running. But as they stumbled back up the tunnel, Jesse couldn't stop himself from looking over his shoulder. And for just a moment, in the darkness beyond their flashlight beams, he thought he saw something move, something that shouldn't know Rowan's name, something that shouldn't sound like his dead mother. They ran. Jesse's flashlight beam bounced wildly as his feet pounded against the tunnel floor. Behind him, he could hear Delilah's ragged breathing, Rowan's panicked gasps. But the tunnel looked wrong, longer than it should be. The rail tracks were on the opposite side now. Jesse's mind scrambled for an explanation that made sense. "Did we take a wrong turn?" Delilah's voice was shaking. They couldn't have. It was a straight shot, one tunnel, no branches. Then they heard it, a rhythmic scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across stone, coming from behind them, getting closer. Jesse didn't look back, didn't let himself think about what could make that sound. They sprinted. His flashlight swung to the left, illuminating a side tunnel he didn't remember seeing before. And in that brief moment of light, Jesse saw something pale, too tall, limbs that bent in ways that weren't right. He forced his legs to move faster. "There!" Rowan shouted. "The entrance!" Jesse saw it, the gap they'd crawled through. Sunlight bleeding through the opening like a promise. Rowan reached it first, throwing himself at the gap and squeezing through. Then Delilah, her hand scraping against rock as she pulled herself out. Jesse was almost there, almost safe. Then something grabbed his ankle. The grip was cold, strong, and sickeningly soft, like fingers made of wet clay. Jesse screamed. He kicked backward as hard as he could, his boot connecting with something that gave way too easily. The grip released. He threw himself through the gap, his shoulders scraping against collapsed rock, his hands clawing at dirt and stone. A rumble shook the ground beneath him. Jesse scrambled forward as rocks collapsed behind him, sealing the entrance completely. Dust exploded outward, choking him as he rolled onto his back. They were outside. The dawn light was gray and cold, but it was the most beautiful thing Jesse had ever seen. Delilah was on her hands and knees, sobbing. Rowan sat with his back against a tree, staring at the collapsed entrance like he couldn't believe it was real. Jesse looked down at his ankle. The marks were already forming, dark bruises in the shape of fingers. He counted them slowly, his hands shaking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. His stomach turned. No hand should have that many fingers. Delilah saw them too. She went pale, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. Jesse pulled his pant leg down, covering the marks, but he could still feel where it had touched him. Cold, wrong. And as they sat there in the gray morning light, Jesse realized something that made his blood run cold. Whatever was in that mine knew they'd escaped, and it knew exactly who they were. Jesse's hands were still shaking when he plugged the camera into his laptop. Rowan and Delilah sat on either side of him, none of them speaking. The bruises on Jesse's ankle throbbed with every heartbeat. The first video loaded. a young man appeared on screen. Early 20s, clean cut, smiling like he didn't have a care in the world. "Hey guys, it's Patrick Donovan, day 1 of exploring the legendary Blackwood Mine. Let's see what secrets this place is hiding." Jesse felt his stomach drop. Patrick looked so alive, so confident. The videos were dated, 3 days of footage. Patrick went deeper into the mine each time, his excitement growing with every video. Day 2 showed him filming strange formations in the rock. He moved his camera close, the light catching patterns that looked almost organic. "These look almost biological," Patrick whispered to the camera, "like something was pressed into the stone when it was still soft. But that doesn't make sense. Rock doesn't work like that." Delilah leaned closer to the screen. "What is that?" Jesse didn't answer. He didn't know. Day 3 started normally. Patrick was in a massive cavern, his light barely reaching the ceiling. He was narrating excitedly about the size of the space. Then his own voice called to him from the darkness. "Patrick, I found the way out, man. Over here." On screen, Patrick spun around, his camera shaking. "Who's there? That's not funny." The voice called again. Same tone, same inflection, but from a different direction. "Come on, Patrick. Your family's worried." The footage became a blur. Patrick was running, his breathing harsh and panicked. Rock walls flashed past. Shadows twisted in his light. Then he stopped. The camera focused on a tunnel wall, deep gouges carved into the stone, letters scratched with something sharp, or maybe with fingernails. "It learns from us. It takes our voices. Don't let it—" The message ended abruptly, like Patrick had been interrupted mid-sentence. The video cut to black. Jesse clicked forward. No more footage existed. The room was silent. Jesse could hear his own heartbeat, could feel Rowan and Delilah breathing beside him. "He never made it out," Delilah whispered. Jesse thought about the journal, day 3, the entry that ended mid-sentence. Patrick had written those words, had carved that warning into stone, and then something had stopped him. Rowan stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "We need to tell someone, the police, someone." "And tell them what?" Jesse asked. "That we illegally entered a sealed mine and found a camera? That something down there mimics voices? Patrick's family deserves to know what happened to him." Jesse looked back at the screen, at the frozen image of that warning carved into stone. "It learns from us." His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from an unknown number. Jesse opened it, his hands going cold. The message was simple, just 3 words. "Thank you, Jesse." But Jesse hadn't told anyone his name except Rowan and Delilah. And the only other person who knew it was still trapped in that mine. Jesse stopped sleeping after the 3rd nightmare. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in the mine. The tunnel stretched endlessly, branching like veins through living tissue. And something was always behind him. Something wearing faces he recognized. His grandmother, Rowan's mother, Patrick, all of them whispering his name. On the 5th night, his phone rang at 3 a.m. Unknown number. Jesse let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was just breathing, wet, rattling, like lungs filled with something they shouldn't be. Rowan called him the next morning. His voice was shaking. "My mom's old number called me last night. The one that's been disconnected for 5 years. Jesse felt ice spread through his chest. "What did they say?" "Nothing, just breathing." They met Delilah at the diner that afternoon. She looked like she hadn't slept either. dark circles under her eyes, hands that wouldn't stop shaking around her coffee cup. "Something knocked on my window last night," she said quietly. "Second floor. When I looked, there was a handprint on the glass. From the outside." She showed them a photo on her phone. The handprint was clear. Too many fingers. Jesse's ankle throbbed where the bruises still hadn't faded. "It followed us out," Rowan whispered. "Didn't it?" Before Jesse could answer, the TV above the counter caught his attention. A news report. The headline made his blood run cold. Construction workers discover old mine tunnel. The reporter stood in front of familiar terrain, the area around Blackwood Mine. Workers breaking ground for the new highway accidentally broke through into an old mining tunnel. Authorities have identified it as part of the historic Blackwood Mine, sealed since 1987. The scene cut to an interview with a construction worker. Tired eyes, nervous smile. "Weirdest thing. We heard voices down there. Sounded like kids calling for help. We reported it to the authorities. They're sending a rescue team down tomorrow morning." Jesse's coffee cup slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Delilah grabbed his arm. "We have to warn them." "They won't believe us," Rowan said. "We don't even have proof." Jesse stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Everyone in the diner turned to look, but he didn't care. "Then we have to go back in. We have to finish what Patrick started." Delilah's face went pale. "Are you insane? We barely made it out the first time. Those workers are going in tomorrow. If we don't stop them, they're going to end up like Patrick." Jesse's hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "We know what's down there now. We know what to expect." "Do we?" Rowan asked quietly. Jesse thought about the text message, the breathing on the voicemails, the handprint on Delilah's window. No, they didn't know what to expect. But they were the only ones who knew anything at all, and that meant they were the only ones who could stop what was coming. They arrived at midnight. Jesse had spent the afternoon gathering supplies, better flashlights, rope. His phone fully charged to document everything. If they didn't make it out, at least someone would know what happened. The construction site was abandoned. Heavy equipment sat motionless in the dark, like sleeping giants. The workers hadn't returned after that first day. Jesse understood why. The new entrance was wide, professionally shored up with metal supports and wooden beams. It looked safe, stable. Jesse knew better. They descended in silence, their new flashlights cutting through the darkness with harsh white beams. The mine felt different this time, not just empty, aware, like the air itself was watching them. "This way," Jesse said, recognizing the tunnel from Patrick's video. They found the cavern 20 minutes later. Jesse's light swept across the walls, and his breath caught in his throat. The biological formations Patrick had filmed were everywhere now, spreading like infection across the stone. They looked like bodies, fossilized humans pressed into the rock, their faces frozen in silent screams. Rowan stepped closer to one, his hand reached out, trembling. "Don't," Delilah whispered, but Rowan's fingers were already touching the formation. He jerked back, his eyes wide. "It's warm," Jesse felt his stomach turn. Stone shouldn't be warm, not this deep underground. Then Delilah made a sound, a choked gasp that made Jesse spin around. She was staring at the far wall, her flashlight shaking in her hand. Jesse followed her light. Patrick was there, or what was left of him. His body was partially merged with the wall, skin pale as limestone. His mouth hung open in a permanent expression of terror. His hands were pressed against the stone like he'd been trying to push himself free. But his eyes moved. They tracked Jesse's movement across the cavern. Slow, deliberate. His lips moved, whispering the same words over and over. It learns. It takes. Don't let it. Delilah turned away and vomited. Jesse forced himself to step closer. Patrick's clothes were still relatively fresh. The fabric hadn't decayed. 6 months, maybe. That's how long he'd been down here. But he looked like he'd been part of the wall for decades. Jesse's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and started recording. "Patrick Donovan," he said, his voice barely steady. "Missing for 6 months. He's alive." Or something like alive. Patrick's eyes shifted to the camera. His lips moved faster now, the whisper becoming more urgent. "It learns. It takes. Don't let it. Don't let it." "Don't let it what?" Jesse whispered. Patrick's mouth opened wider. The whisper turned into something that might have been a scream, except no sound came out. And then, from deeper in the cavern, Jesse heard it, his own voice, clear, calm, familiar. "We should go deeper. There's something I need to show you." Jesse's blood ran cold. He hadn't said those words, but his voice was calling to them from the darkness. And it sounded so convincing, even Jesse almost believed it. They moved deeper into the cavern, away from Patrick's whispered warnings, away from Jesse's stolen voice calling from the dark. Then the tunnel opened up. Jesse's flashlight beam disappeared into nothing. The space was massive, cathedral-sized, and when all 3 of their lights swept across the walls, Jesse felt something inside him break. Bodies, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, pressed into the stone like insects trapped in amber, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and desperation. Their hands reaching out, fingers splayed against the rock, different eras of clothing. Jesse saw rotted fabric that looked centuries old, Victorian dresses, mining uniforms from the early 1900s, modern jeans and hoodies, all of them trying to escape, none of them succeeding. In the center of the chamber was a pit. Jesse approached slowly, his legs shaking so badly he could barely walk. He knelt at the edge and shined his light down. The beam didn't reach the bottom, and then the pit breathed, a rhythmic, wet inhalation that echoed up from depths Jesse couldn't comprehend. The sound made his skin crawl, made every instinct in his body scream at him to run, but he understood now. "It's not a creature," Jesse whispered. "It's the mine itself, or something that became the mine. It traps people, absorbs them, learns from them." Rowan was backing away, his flashlight swinging wildly. "We need to leave, now, before—" His own voice came from the pit. Perfect, exact, down to the fear in his tone. "We need to leave, now, before—" Then Delilah's voice, young and terrified. "Jesse, where are you? I'm scared." Jesse spun around. Delilah was standing right next to him, her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't said those words. Then Jesse heard his own voice, calling his name from the darkness, the same way he'd call out if he was lost, if he was alone. The pit wasn't just breathing. It was speaking. Using every voice it had ever taken, their voices mixed with hundreds of others, thousands of others, a chorus of the dead and the dying and the absorbed. Jesse's mind raced. Patrick's journal, the structural notes about support beams. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, scrolling through the photos he'd taken of Patrick's map. There, support beams marked in red, critical structural points. Patrick had figured it out before the mine took him. "If we collapse the chamber," Jesse said, his voice barely audible over the chorus. "The whole section caves in. It buries this, seals it." "And us with it," Rowan said. Jesse looked at the walls, at the bodies pressed into stone, at Patrick, still alive after 6 months, whispering warnings no one had heard. "We find the beams. We take them down. And we run faster than we've ever run in our lives." Delilah was crying, but she nodded. The pit breathed again, deeper this time, hungry, and somewhere in that terrible chorus of stolen voices, Jesse heard his grandmother, calling his name the way she used to when he was a child, telling him to come closer, promising him everything would be okay. He knew it was a lie. But God, it sounded so much like her. Jesse wrapped the rope around the first support beam. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely tie the knot. "Hurry," Delilah whispered, her voice barely audible over the chorus of stolen voices. They pulled together. The beam groaned, shifted, then gave way with a crack that echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The mine screamed. There was no other word for it. A sound like 1,000 voices crying out in agony. The walls shuddered, cracks spiderwebbed across the stone, and the bodies started falling. They peeled away from the walls like shed skin, crumpling to the ground in heaps of pale, fossilized flesh. Some of them moved, fingers twitching, mouths opening in silent cries. Jesse didn't look, couldn't look. "Run!" Rowan shouted. They sprinted for the entrance as the chamber collapsed behind them. The pit's breathing turned into a roar. Angry, desperate, hungry. Jesse's lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he didn't stop. The tunnel was collapsing. Support beams falling like dominoes, rock raining down from the ceiling. He saw light ahead, the entrance, safety. Rowan made it through first, then Delilah. Jesse threw himself forward as the tunnel behind him disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. They collapsed on the ground outside, gasping for air, covered in dirt and blood and things Jesse didn't want to think about. The earth beneath them shuddered one final time, then went still. Jesse looked back. The entrance was gone, buried under tons of rock and earth, sealed forever, he hoped. The authorities came the next morning, investigated the cave-in, called it an unfortunate but natural geological event. The construction would have to be rerouted. No one asked about the 3 kids covered in mine dust. No one seemed to notice them at all. Jesse, Rowan, and Delilah never spoke about what they saw. They couldn't. Who would believe them? But sometimes, late at night, Jesse's phone rings. The caller ID shows his own number. When he answers, there's only breathing, wet, rattling, familiar, and sometimes, barely audible beneath it, Patrick's voice whispers 2 words. "Thank you." Jesse saved the construction workers. They sealed the mine. Patrick's warning had worked, but Jesse knows the truth. Something that old, that hungry, doesn't die from a cave-in. It just waits. And in the mountains of Appalachia, there are dozens of abandoned mines. Hundreds of sealed tunnels stretching through the earth like veins through a body. On quiet nights, if you listen carefully, you can hear them breathing. Jesse hears it now, standing on his porch in the early morning darkness. The sound carried on the wind from the mountains, rhythmic, patient, endless, waiting for the next person desperate enough to ignore the warnings, waiting for the next voice to learn. The bruises on his ankle have long since faded, but sometimes, in the mirror, Jesse swears he can see something pressed beneath his skin, like a handprint, like a reminder, He'll never go back to Blackwood Mine, but he knows with absolute certainty that someday it will call his name again, and he's terrified of what will happen if he's not strong enough to ignore it.